And it's good to talk to you at long last.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Sorry, I'm a little bit late, but we got it going, and so let's do it before something else happens.
That's okay. Yeah. Well, I've been following your channel and following your thoughts on the UFO phenomenon for a long time now. A few
Okay.
years, and and I know you have kind of switched in more recent years to going with more through more of a consciousness route as opposed to the physical nuts and bolts,
Hmm.
100% at least.
Yeah.
In the in the community, if you want to call it that, where we have all the whistleblowers, we have all the different things going on all the time. It seems to me that there's been a wide umbrella cast over what is considered UFO UAP phenomenon. So, do you think that there multiple things going on, or do you think that it's do you still are you still a believer in like crash retrievals and nuts and
Oh
bolts
yeah.
types of things too?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I guess I would quote Jim Semivan, who was the head of covert ops for the CIA, who had the
Hmm.
beings in his room, and the way he describes it is, um, we have bodies and crafts. He says, yeah, but that doesn't mean you know what you're dealing with. And so there's all these complex things that have now risen in terms of what they're saying. For example, James Lukaski, who ran the program for OSAP, he was the main guy, talks about the fact that he was in a congressional facility in 2011 and said we've managed to get in the craft. And then it occurred to me that something's wrong. He's hinting at something. And then the last statement, they asked him, "How do you get in the craft?" And he said, "I can't comment on that." And it's this idea that the craft may actually be alive, conscious, and it will not allow you in the craft unless you vibrate at the right level. That's a story that's told by Jack Sarfati, this physicist, and he claims that a friend of his, a Navy guy on a naval facility on the East Coast, flew the craft, and that's the whole point. So it just gets this really complex thing. And Jim Semivan says, he said, "I'll bet a year of my pension against anybody who wants to take me on that yes, we have bodies and crafts, but when he got the 7 hour briefing, they knew nothing about UFOs. They sort of like a dead end. It had this consciousness effect that they really couldn't back engineer. But the psi stuff, he said, was all real. And he um, he made that statement, and then I was trying to figure out like what was he told, what was the psi stuff, and now I've heard this is kind of scary that one of the things he apparently had told another CIA person that has now talked was talking about moving timelines. And this is this whole idea. If you've seen Ross Coulthart, has just done a video about portals. He says there's a government controlled portal in the United States. He believes it's that he's been to the fence of this thing. And I've written about portals for many years. That if they've got technology, the technology is going to be like portal type technology. This thing is sort of popping in, popping out, or it may be even this whole idea of nature reality, that there really is no physical world, and they know that, and we just don't understand how the world actually works in terms of how it's built. For example, if you go to AI, you search on AI and you say, what is primary, fields or matter? And they'll say fields are primary. So matter comes out of fields. And this concept where we think that everything's physical. And so I would say, yeah, there's intelligence. It's, it's coming from somewhere. I'm not too sure that it's coming from other planetary systems unless they're at like a fifth dimensional thing there where they've sort of escaped. That's how I think they're getting here. They're popping in, they're popping out, and we're back engineering as much as we can. We may get a little bit of stuff from metals and stuff like that, but in terms of what Jim Semivan says, he said, I can assure you they haven't gotten anywhere. They have no. And Eric Davis says the same thing, that in 1980, 19, no, 2000 and no 1989 they put it on the shelf because they couldn't figure it out, and that was one of the reasons why Lockheed was going to give the craft to Bob Bigelow. Is they couldn't figure the thing out. It was costing them a huge amount of money to do the security. So I'm sort of
Yeah.
on the fence in terms of, yeah, we got material, but the thing is, what is the material? What's really going on?
Mhm.
You know, why are these things crashing? Are they being gifted to us, or are these
Yeah. Like
aliens?
that's like the Jacques Vallée thing where he, you know,
Yeah,
but yeah, I'd heard Eric Davis say that before, but then you hear a lot of contradictory things, you know, that, oh no, we've certainly uh, reverse engineered, and then they'll say that you know, I think Stephen Greer is one of those people that says that all the craft that you're seeing are reversed engineered now, and especially like the triangles and things like that, you know.
yeah. I'm always hesitant on that. I mean, I know this whole Greer in 1954, and Linda Howe is claiming that we've been traveling to other star systems. I just look at the war now in Iran, and especially the war in Ukraine. They're dropping bombs like World War II bombs. It's just the bigger bombs. There's jet engine, but I really don't see the technology. I mean, you think that we'd be doing a little bit better in terms of wars and stuff like that if we had the technology. Because in '75, when I had my first sighting, that's the immediate first thing they told me is, "Oh, this is the Americans," and I'm going, "Wow, man, they had what I saw in 1975. I mean, they should have been doing better in the Vietnam War. They lost the Vietnam War. I mean, and people say, well, they're hiding it, but Semivan says no. They'll protect it, but they're still going to use it. You'll see some spin-offs. I haven't really seen any spin-offs, and so that's the thing. I move with Jacques Vallée that the more you look at it, the more you realize that it's probably not going to be ETs. For example, there's just a story. I don't know if you follow the story that McCaslin, Neil McCaslin, has just disappeared, and he was the main source
Mhm.
to Tom DeLonge, and so
Oh
he,
yeah, I
he
heard something about
so
that. Yeah.
he's disappeared. And when the story that DeLonge told is that the general in this restaurant inside a airport said it was the Cold War, and we discovered a life form. And you'll never hear them talk. That's why they're always using the word. We have no proof of extraterrestrial. They keep using that, the government, to defend themselves, and that's true. They
Hmm.
they they may not believe it's extraterrestrial, so they can actually say that. Yeah, and the more accurate question is, do you have bodies and crafts? So it's kind of an uphill thing. I mean, you can see all sorts of things. When I do a lot of stuff with experiencers, and I've had a lot of experiences. I say, ask them if they're actually an alien. So Nancy Tremaine, who was the first abductee before Betty and Barney Hill, about 2 months before them, asked, and they said, we are neither alien to this planet or any other planet. We've always been here." When I talked to these beings in Great Britain, asked them, "Are you extraterrestrials?" And the reply that came back was, "Would you like us to be extraterrestrials? We can do that if you want. We can take you to our planet, but no, we're not extraterrestrials." Or Sherry Wilde, who wrote the book The Forgotten Promise, which is a pretty big selling book in the UFO community. Um, she was told, she asked Daw, because the claim Daw was claiming he was from Andromeda, but he was gray, and the publisher said, you got to figure this out. I mean, that's not, you can't be. If he's a gray, he's from Zeta Reticuli. So she said, really? And so she went and she said to this being, the next time he came, his name is Da. She said, what's going on? Are you actually an alien? What the hell's going on here? And then he said what I sort of believe is going on. He said, no, I am an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. So we're all etheric beings. There's these puppets that we control on the stage, and we've got everything confused as to what's going on. And that's what the phenomenon is trying to do. It's trying to get us to explore and figure out, like, is the world the way we think it is? And the more we are in awe and curiosity of all these weird things that they do, the more we struggle to figure it out, and our consciousness rises, and suddenly we realize there's this consciousness interface. Because you get stuff like, when I saw this back in '75, the second sighting I saw is, you'll see the things jumping around the sky like a ping pong ball, or it breaks
Like
into
they
five
skip,
pieces.
like they skip by type of thing.
Yeah, or they break into five pieces, and then they go back together again, or they take off like a lightning at the speed of light. Like, why do you have to take off so fast? I mean, why do you have to
Hmm.
move away? Why don't you just go slow? And there's all these things that make me wonder, like making triangles in the sky, where you'll see they make triangle. They're going to make a triangle, and they fly in a triangle. So you come 1,000 light years to make a triangle in the sky, or put a triangle on a woman's arm, or to crash the ship, or there's all sorts of stuff. Doesn't make any sense that
Hmm.
it's advanced. that they're going to do these crazy things. Like anybody who's had a UFO sighting, I say to them, "You had a UFO sighting, yeah? What was it doing?" And everybody says the same thing. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there. It was. Do you think it saw you? Yeah, yeah. I think it saw me, and or that I was watching, and stuff like that. And the phenomena doesn't seem to be doing anything. It's just sort of there. It's like as Jim Semivan says, it teases you, it cajoles you, it lies to you, but you can't take it home to meet the family. You can never take it home to meet the family. You can never solve it, and that's what Eric Walker, the highest source that anybody ever had, that we had back in the 1980s, said, "Leave it alone. There's nothing you can do about it." And this is an indication that I didn't figure out for years. He was already saying back in a 1991 interview that there's nothing you can do about this unless you have the mind of Einstein. You're not going to figure this thing out. Or he said, "What do you know about ESP? Unless you know about ESP and how it works, you're not going to be taken in. You're not going to be taken into the control group." And he kept making these warnings that there's nothing you can do about this phenomenon. You're up against the windmills. That's what he said. And that's what Jim Semivan is saying. So there are some whistleblowers, but whistleblowers are more or less low level people, operational people and stuff like that. The officials, I think, when you start looking at them, even you take a Barack Obama. Barack Obama says, "Yeah, we have UFOs. They're flying around. We have these photographs, but we don't know what it is." And he may be telling the truth. That may be what it is. They understand. Yes, it's real. It's metallic. It comes as, but you'll have, even in seances, you'll have hands appear. Leslie Kane, the hand that appeared, touches the hand. So the phenomena can make stuff fall into the room and disappear and stuff like that. So the fact that we got bodies and crafts is indicative of me of them sort of giving us these hints, trying to move us down a certain road, and yet not give us the answer. So why would they want to give U.S. technology to the U.S. military that's going to use it to kill people? Like, the phenomenon doesn't make any sense. The phenomenon is there, and they can't figure it out. And now you hear more and more people talk about the fact that it has this conscious interface to it, that you need somebody to touch the craft. The craft is alive. It's conscious. It has its own mind. It'll close the door. It won't let you in, stuff like that. And you hear more and more of that. In 75, we heard nothing like that. There was no such discussion. Now, a lot of high-level officials are talking about this thing, like this thing that there's this portal. Well, I've written like 2 books on portals, and I've got portals in numerous things, numerous books that I've written about Mount Shasta, that with this Mission Rama group that's is able to open these portals. And I've talked to people that were in the portals, and some of my best cases are in that vein. But that you'll get into the sighting where you talk to people in the portal and you say, "What did you see?" And they say, "Oh, yeah, last year this Antarel being came and we were all in the portal and he was solid. This year he's a hologram. You can see through him." And then the one guy is in there. I said, "Oh, he's a hologram." He said, "No, he wasn't." I said, "Yeah, everybody said he was a hologram." He said, "Look, I was close enough to see the lines in his face. It was not a hologram." So you get these bizarre things. Is, what are we really dealing with here? Are we dealing with flesh and blood? Or are we dealing with something that can come into the physical world and then go back into that world? And that's why in that world you have dead people on board the ship, because you're in a different realm. You're in the realm where the dead people are able to wander around, and they can just pull these people in and into the experience.
Yeah, I think we're on the just because I've seen so much of your channel. I think we're pretty much on the same page as far as the nature of reality goes.
Yeah.
So I think that what confuses me though is the physical aspect of it, and then maybe like, because I've thought before, are these things, obviously I don't think you can trust. Personally, I don't trust any of the intelligence people or the people who are asking the government if what they can tell, and stuff like that, because it seems like it's trying to push a narrative in a certain direction, like that it's a threat and all this stuff. It's been around long enough to where if it was a threat, I believe we'd know by now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
And these
so
guys, the first question you got to ask about whistleblowers is why you're not in jail. I
yeah,
mean, if
exactly.
you leak a document, you can get 5 years in jail. You can get life sentence or treason and stuff
Yeah,
like
or
that.
you're Edward
And
Snowden and you run out to
yeah,
Russia.
yeah.
It's
So
not
this is the
something that.
most highly classified secret. Like Snowden really didn't have that high a clearance. He couldn't get to this kind of stuff. But what you have is the highest classified secret. And the guy, I mean, I got a phone call. Like, I'm Canadian, so I got a phone call from one guy said, U.S. intelligence said I should phone you and talk to you. And I said, "Really? You realize I'm a Canadian, do you?" And they're like, "Come on, why would U.S. intelligence need me? Why are they sending?" And that's the whole deal is why are these people running around telling this story? If they and no, and the other thing is, if you had a security clearance and you're able to see this kind of stuff, and that the part of the deal is you made a promise in the security clearance that you would not reveal this kind of stuff. So if you lied then and you are revealing this stuff, why should I believe anything you're saying? And that's what
Mm,
like you said, there seems to be a narrative being pushed, and that's the whole thing. People don't realize that in these highly classified programs, according to Eric Davis, there's 10 times the money spent on security as there is on the program. So people keep forgetting that you're up against this massive counterintelligence operation to protect this secret, and they're going to do what I think they do is they take disinformation, information surrounded by disinformation, and put it out there so nobody knows who to believe, what to believe. And if you've got a good story, they'll put a second story like yours with a different witness that tells a different version of the story. And then is William telling the truth, or is this other guy telling the truth? And that's what they want to do, is just create this mass confusion. They're not going to, there's no point in killing you because that sort of verifies the fact that you're onto something. But they just throw mud in the water, and there's just so much stuff out there. And I know for a fact, I can't really talk about it because I was in part of this program, but they are running another operation right now. And there's a filmmaker who is believes that he's been chosen, almost like Bill Moore and Tom DeLonge and all that kind of stuff. And they're running this operation right now. And it's the promise. We've got these guys. It's the same story all the time. We're from inside the government. We're upset about how it's not being revealed, and we're here to tell you. And again, it comes to this thing: why are they telling? But this is an actual operation. I was in it. They sort of cut me out because I keep talking about it. And the other guy, I checked, and he still believes that this is going to take place.
well, it seems like one problem with with people like, let's say, Tom DeLonge, for instance.
Yeah.
Someone like him is, I don't know that much about him personally, but it seems like he went into it like because he had a great interest in it. He had a lifelong interest in it, and then it seemed like he got swarmed upon by a lot
Yeah.
of these
Sure.
spooks,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then he felt special because they're swarming upon him,
Yeah.
and so he started believing what they said to him, and
Yeah.
I know that they may know some things,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time, with other than nuts and bolts, do you have a craft? Do you have alien bodies? Other than that question right there, I think that we as experiencers know as much as they do.
Or yeah, or even more, because that's like with Chris Bledsoe when he asked Tim Taylor, who I met. He asked Tim Taylor, "What are you doing on my property? You guys have destroyed my life, and you got all these intelligence people here." And that's when this Taylor said to him, "Well, this is the way it is, Chris. They seem to like you. There's things around you. They're showing up for you. They don't like us. So we're here to find out what you're finding out, what you're learning." And that's why I say, I mean, if you're an experiencer and you got this message, you can bet the CIA is gathering this material, because how do they get intelligence? They got to get it from people on the street. It doesn't fall out of the sky. So they're
Hmm.
talking to people, and they're interacting with the UFO community, following the UFO community, and they're trying to figure out as well this sort of message. And that's a deadly message, because I basically say that if you take a look at the bottom line, if it were to happen, it's basically a pure communist system. It's like a kibbutz, or like we call it colonies here in Canada, with Mennonite colonies, where there's everybody's the same level, and you put in what you can contribute, take out only what you need, and that sort of thing, where everybody's sort of equal. I mean, that's what these guys are. I mean, if you take a look, they call it the hive mentality, where everybody's just doing their job and stuff like that. And I say to people, like, as Eric Walker said to us in 1991, so what are you going to do when you figure it out? What are you going to do? You're just curious, admit it. And the thing is, what are you going to do if you figure it out and suddenly you realize that this is a hive mentality, and that they can come into the United States and build anti-gravity cars for $1,000 a model? And I say to people, you want this? I mean, are you seriously going to tell me that you are going to, in the United States of America, as it stands today in 2026, you're going to allow grays, reptilians, and mantids to walk the streets of America and say, "Welcome, we immigrate," and stuff like that? I mean, people haven't thought it through in terms of this end result.
See, another problem I have with with the physical interpretation, and I guess that's probably why they don't like them. As you were saying, that Tim Taylor said, like
Yeah,
why they like someone like Chris Bledsoe as opposed to him is because these are purely materialist people.
yeah, yeah.
That can only look at things through that lens. But one of the problems I have with the purely like that physical interpretation of things like the Greys or the Mantis, is I can't imagine them building those ships in a factory and getting up and packing their lunch to go to work to build spaceships. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. When you start looking at it, a lot of it doesn't make sense. Even the thing where I've got a list of 42 things that would indicate that you're probably not dealing with aliens, and it's where they've actually told people we come into your world, we can take on whatever form that the being will actually change form, like this ship shifting stuff, where they can
mm,
shift as anytime they want, and then the whole thing about. It doesn't have any belly button, doesn't have clothes, it doesn't have sex organs. It doesn't. There's no toilets on board the craft, and you start looking at this stuff, and it's like weird, 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 and it's just like after you've seen so much, you start going like Jacques Vallée, where he says, I'm watching the film on the screen, and then I see this little light going up, coming out of this wall behind me, and I'd like to steal the keys at night and go in there and see what's going on, and that's the whole thing. It's the Plato cave thing that we're sort of instantly interpreting stuff, and that's the way we've always done stuff, and yet we're doing the same thing we're doing in 1947. Let's get better photographs. Let's take more photographs. It's almost like the next case is going to solve it. There's going to be a
mm-hmm.
landing somewhere where it's going to be indisputable or whatever. And we got 260,000 sightings. And it's we sort of assume that if we get 263,000, we'll figure this thing out. And it's like the
Yeah.
definition of insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over again with the same and thinking you're going to get a different result. We're doing the same thing we were doing in 1947. And the experiencers who, I read all the time about this thing about experiencers. 40% of them say at one point during their experience with the non-human intelligence, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And that's to me is the key, is these people are getting information from this higher realm. And those are the people you listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Guys that are on the street, it's hypotheses, but it's left brain, rational, analytical, and it's two egos talking back and forth. Who cares? I mean, what you think or analyze this thing. The experiencers have a pretty common story about what's going on, and they're totally being ignored because science
Yeah.
always wants to do the thing where we're too cool for that. We want to be nice and cool. We
Yeah.
want to look smart, and we're going to measure stuff.
Well,
And
it's that physicalist, the materialist interpretation of everything. Whereas, like the experiencer thing seems to be more along the lines of like a mystical
yeah,
psychedelic experience
yeah,
than it is anything else. So that for that reason, like I just heard the other day, someone talking about I can't remember who it was, but they were saying that they believed that there was this giant craft under the water around in the Bahamas or somewhere around there that was building Tic Tac. It was like doing this and shooting them out and all this stuff. I was like, that just seems too it just seems too earthy. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
It seems too because some people get into their like maybe the word might be anthropocentric or something like
yeah,
that. Like because you're interpreting things through the only way you can understand it, which
yeah.
is saying, oh, if these things exist, then someone has to build them and put the rivets in them and all that stuff or whatever. But I don't think that to me it just doesn't seem like that's what's happening. At the same time, you have tons of like evidence about secret government. They recovered this craft from here, this craft from there.
Oh yeah.
Um,
And that is true, I think. But the question is, how far have they gotten? Have they really
mm-hmm,
made any? They're throwing piles of money at it, or maybe they're not. Maybe this is a cover for other programs that they're running, where they're saying we're working on the UFO thing, and we're really not working on the UFO thing. We're actually doing something else and spending, because that's the thing, is you never know where the money's being spent. It's all sort of covered by classification, and it doesn't sort of make any sense you'd release it, because the Russians, I mean, like on the night that Trump said he was going to release all the files, well, they must have had a huge party. Like, holy cow, they're actually going to tell us, and we're gonna get
mm-hmm.
intelligence where the crafts are, and then they've got their part of the story, and you may give them the piece that they want, and so it's
Yeah,
but
I
it
think
goes
if you've been,
back to the nature of reality, that when you break it all down, the experiencers are telling you no, that if it's paranormal, that means the world is not the way you think it is. There's something beyond what you think, and we're working on it, and the rest of the world is totally oblivious. They have no idea that the world is the way they think it is. They think there's color. They don't realize there's no color. There's no. It's all nothing is solid. An electron is just a field inside a field. It's not a physical thing. And you go on this kind of stuff, and that's what Jim Semivan says. There does not appear to be any there. And I keep saying to people, what the hell is he talking about? This is a high level guy, and he makes this statement. There does not appear to be any there. People say all we have to do is put together the dots. I'm not sure there's any dots. And that's a guy who knows what this legacy program. He knows there's crafts and bodies, why is he saying that? And or you get Lukatsky, where Lukatsky says, and this I have as this real bad evidence that we're dealing with something else. Is he said there's 260,000 sightings, and he said, and then you look at him, it's like driving down the freeway and all the cars are different, and he's indicating like all the sightings are different, and so it's an individuality thing where each of us have different fingerprints, and it's an individual thing that being developed, and we have this idea that there's this pattern like Tic Tacs, and so people will talk about Tic Tacs, but when you look at the Tic Tacs, they're all different, or people will say grays. So I even do a PowerPoint presentation where I take Whitley Strieber's gray and I put it against Betty Hill's gray.
Mm-hmm.
They do they look the same? They're not even close. And then I put Betty Andreasen's gray, and then I put LB, and I start putting all these grays on the screen side by side, and you start looking at them. They're all different, and people just assume the gray is a gray, and they're all going to look the same, and that's not true. I've never seen two grays that look the same. Or one guy said I had a setting at 56 with the grays, and I drew it. I said, "Let me look," and he's got blue. The grays got blue eyes, bright blue eyes, and it's like I have that for my collection because I have a collection of these grays that people that are professional drawers that draw. And
Yeah, I've always said that like either we're being visited by like tons of different aliens from tons of different planets, because you have one-offs like the 1973 Pascagoula abduction. Like when have you ever heard of that one before? With the lobster claws and the all that, and but with the grays, you do have. You have the variations and stuff, but I wonder with that, like maybe they are seeing the same thing, but it's like a, if you go back and look at a witness reports of when a bomb exploded or something, you're going to get like all kinds of different descriptions of what was happening. The shady person that was hanging out on the corner here, you'll get different descriptions of that person.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Yeah, sure. I'm just saying that when you start looking at them, you figure somebody would get to the same. Or if you've heard the Mike Clellan story, you get some real stuff that really makes it look like no, we're dealing with an etheric being that's taking on a puppet body, and that's he's out of his body, and he's the guy that did all the owl books. So he's out of his body, and he's over time with this craft that's out on in the Utah. He's driving home to Indiana. And he said suddenly he's inside the craft, and there's two grays one on each side of him. He's walking down this hallway, and there's a gray suit hanging on a hook. And as he walks past the gray suit, he said, "Suddenly, I'm a gray." And he looks at his hands. He's going, "Oh my God, I'm a gray." And he's looking, and he's 6 feet tall. He looks the same now. He's just 3 feet tall, same as these grays beside him. And he said, it was absolutely a gray. And I looked at my feet and stuff like that. So he was walking along, and they put him in front of this council. And then he says, it looked like a bad hotel room in Indiana. It had carpet on the floor, and it was a wooden table. And it's like, come on, this is not a flying saucer. There's carpet on the floor, dirty carpet on the floor. And the being say to him, "It's time." And then Mike Clown said, "What am I doing here? It's time." "Time for what?" "It's time for you to get going." And he said, "Get going and doing what?" And then they allow him to remember that he had volunteered to write these all books. And then he's all upset, and he's swearing at him. "You never told me it was going to be like this. You never told me it was going to be this depressing and this hard. And you never warned me about any of this kind of stuff." He was really angry. And then they said, "You volunteered for this. You get going. You volunteered for this." And 2 days later, he starts writing the owl books. And that's the thing. When you see that kind of stuff, you realize this weird thing where it can take on whatever form it wants. It can morph. Or like I have the idea, like if you go across other modalities, like we wrote that, the Big Game 2-book series where we compare all the different phenomena. So if you take a look, my father, before he died, he had 2 days before, he told my mother and he told my older sister, he said, "My father was here today." And my mother says to him, "Oh, really? What did your father have to say?" "He was just here. That's all you need to know." My father's pretty close mouth. He said, "That's all you need to know." and then 2 days later he died. And the question is, so why would my father my grandfather reassembling his atoms and coming back into the room, or is he projecting that thing? And if he's lived many lives, why does he project as a different thing? Because my father wouldn't know who he was. He's coming across. It's meaningful to my father, and if they can come in and appear physical, because a lot of people will tell you that these encounters, these people are actual physical. They're actually real, like flesh and blood. Or the Leslie Kane is the biggest one. Where Leslie Kane, I got the chance to interview her, and I said all I want to ask her is about the hand that appears in the seance, where the ectoplasm comes up on the table, and she said I've seen it 3 or 4 times, and the table's lit underneath, and this ectoplasm comes, and this hand forms, and she said I felt it, and it was a real hand. I could feel the knuckles and the tendons. It was soft like a baby's hand. It was warm, and she was touching it and holding it, and then the hand bangs twice on the table, and then it just goes back into ectoplasm. So that's dead people creating this phenomena that comes into the physical world and appears as a physical thing. I mean, if dead people can do this, you can imagine these advanced civilization by a million years, what they can do. They just understand the nature of reality, and that's why I call it the theory of wow. All they're trying to do in everything they're doing, they just want you to go, wow, what the hell is going on? And it forces you to explore, because Einstein said mystery is at the basis of all scientific discovery. And that's the thing is people are trying to struggle to figure out a mystery, and then you discover something new, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to drag us along and make us realize the world is not the way you think it is. Because if the world was nuts and bolts and materialistic, this stuff wouldn't be happening, and this stuff is happening, and that's where we're at now. Where we're starting to realize, and people tell the stories, and people don't get crazy. I mean, when the first woman told me she'd flown the craft in 2013, I was ready to throw her out of the house. I thought she was insane. I couldn't believe she was saying that. Now you ever just go, yeah, okay, whatever. And that's what they're doing. Is they're I think what all this witness stuff is doing is just desensitizing us. So in 2017, when everybody didn't believe there's UFOs, New York Times puts it out, and people, yeah, I knew that already. Tell me something different. And now they're sort of hinting that there's aliens. And I'll guarantee if they said there was aliens and actually here in crafts, people go, I know. Now where are they from? I know that. You
Mm-hmm.
tell me, and because it's that consciousness, what they're trying to do is raise it, and yet try to protect the technology, which according to Semivan is the fact that, or even Lukatsky said, when we reached the craft, we got in and there was nothing inside the craft. There was no controls. There was no aliens. There was nothing. And then he does this thing where he hints. He said, so what are we really dealing with? And he does that, and he's making that point. Like, what are we really dealing with? Is this really an extraterrestrial craft? And he's been inside the craft. And so I don't deny that they can make things manifest, around and change things, or because you'll see stuff like Men in Black, where the Men in Black, they can create this Men in Black stuff, and that's all very real people and stuff. And it's them that it's not the government type people, and so they can sort of manifest as whatever they want. Do
Yeah,
it.
because I remember hearing that, or I believe the first mentions of the Men in Black, to my knowledge, was probably with John Keel in the early '70s, and
It goes
and
back. It goes back right to the first crash that everybody leaves out. Everybody talks about the beginning of UFOs as being Kenneth Arnold. It was
but
actually
it
3 days
seems,
before was the Maury Island,
yeah,
and Men in Black came the day after.
it seems like the Men in Black though are not really like, because I guess in pop culture they've gotten associated with they're FBI or they're from some
Yeah,
sort of office or whatever like that. But it
yeah,
seems like the earlier reports of Men in Black, there was no insinuation of that. It was like that they were just as strange as an alien being.
yeah.
Like they would get like they would speak weird and talk
Mhm.
in weird ways, or they would be like in wearing an outdated suit,
Yeah,
or driving in some weird outdated car or something like that. They looked kind of strange in the face. They were just they seemed like they didn't belong. They didn't seem like and then I
exactly.
guess over the years it got to where that people just related that with government officials.
Yeah, yeah. And when you look, you see this. I call it the dream sign. If you ever studied lucid dreaming, and the point is we're sleeping. And so when you see like somebody coming to do a poll and they're dressed in black and there's a man and a woman, and the woman's got her wig and she's on sideways, you got to go, are these really people? What's going
Mm-hmm.
on here? And that's what they're doing. That's the dream sign. That's the sign that says this may actually be a dream. You actually may be this is all just
Yeah.
made. We can create whatever we want. You can create, and even the one being said to Yossi Ronan, who's an Israeli experiencer, said, we when we come into your world, we take on a body. We don't have to, but we do to work in your world. You can do the same thing, you just don't know it. And that's this whole thing, that we don't understand how reality works. And it's all like watching a magic trick to us, and we're going, holy cow, holy
Hmm.
cow. And yet behind there's rules and regulations. It's not happening by accident. And I think they're doing that breadcrumb thing. So that's what they do with the Men in Black. Is that it's the same thing. It's weird. It has that dream sign thing to make your left brain pick it up and go, hey, what's really going on here? Is this really what I
Hmm.
think it is?
So
Otherwise, they would, correct those mistakes. They wouldn't do that.
when you were talking about the guy earlier who was on board the craft and saw the gray suit and put on the gray suit and became
Yeah.
a gray, that's what I thought because years ago I got into lucid dreaming and I did lucid dreaming like every night
Wow.
for years,
Wow.
and it's been almost 20 years since I did it, but I did it a lot. I did it
Wow.
to where enough to where I got bored of it and consciously quit doing it.
Okay.
But
Wow.
that's what I was going to say is a lot of that stuff like that guy with the suit. And now all of a sudden he's a gray and everything, and the way that things morph and change, that's very indicative of the dream world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just the way things are. And then although we know that when we're seeing, like, I had a sighting, the only sighting I ever had, which was uh, in about 1990, and I saw like a dozen or more, and they were in the sky, and they appeared as lights. I don't know how high they were or anything like that,
Mhm.
but they were moving around. They were moving around like something underwater. Like you see like
Okay.
these like small creatures move around underwater or something like that.
Yeah.
They were moving around like that in just weird kind of flowing haphazard patterns. And then one of them made a circle around another one, and then they shot some flashing beam back and forth between them. I sat and
Wow.
watched it for about 30 minutes, and then
Wow.
so long to where I just got bored and went back in the house. I tried to get my mom to come out and watch it, but she was like, she didn't believe me or something. I don't know, but things like that. And then when you're talking about how people often say like, oh, do you know that, or do you feel like they saw you? And I didn't really feel like that, but I did feel like, why would they do all that?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is who are you putting this show on for?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like you're talking about these things going around. I mean, you come 1,000 light years to go around and make circles and stuff. It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. I always say to people, like, what was it doing? And because that's what happened to me the second night. It came right at me the second night, and it made this turn and sort of went back again. And as I was flying away, I'm going, holy cow, it could
Is
be
this in
extraterrestrial.
1975
And
that you
and and
said?
then, but I said, what's it doing? We have even had a joke because we're right on the American border, and we had a joke that they're coming from the United States. They're picking up beer because Canadian beer is a lot stronger. They're doing a beer run. They're picking up beer and they're going to go back. Because it was showing us like, well, because it was a small town, it didn't have anything except we had the nuclear weapons on the other side of the border, all in
Oh, well, there you
nuclear
go.
missile towers. And
What did it look like? Was this in 1975 that you
yeah.
had
Well,
talked
the
about?
first, the first, the first night, we didn't know what we're looking for. Because the town was reporting all this stuff. So we just went out there. We didn't go for 3 months. We knew it was going on, but we weren't interested, so we didn't go. And then they got this film. They caught it on the ground, and then we went, "Oh, let's go see what they're going." And we're looking around. We didn't know what they're looking for. And the important part of the story is that when it appeared from the left to the right, nobody said, "Is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what they're looking at." Everybody's went, "Oh, there it is. there it is." They just instantly knew. It was like a plasma object, and it was sort of alive, and it was going really slow, and it was sort of pulsing, and it was flying right in front of the car. It was just really, and it was really, really low. And I remember jumping out of the car, and there was these school buses. I wanted to get to the school buses so I could watch it as it flew away, and it was just flying along. And that's the second night. Second night was jumping around the sky, and then as it came, it was the same object we saw the first night, except it had a green glow on the back of it. But that was the thing; it changed from this object jumping around in the sky to this object that was this red plasma thing. And then people
Mm.
describe this all the time, how the craft is morphing and changing shape and stuff like, or breaking in pieces. Like we had that one where they threw a stone at it, it broke the UFO in pieces, and the UFO all went back through the water and reassembled and went up into this beam of light into the ship. And you're going with that kind of stuff where you go like, what are they doing? What, you know, what's this whole deal about being in a reservoir and just sort of 2 o'clock in the morning? And to me, it appeared after many years, I sort of figured it out. It was this theory of, wow, they just want to get your attention. So they make a crop circle. Nobody knows if it's real. Nobody knows if it's not real. They mutilate cattle. And I told, I was talking to Linda Howe a lot about it. They want you. That's why they do this really weird, and it may actually be Gaia. It may not be UFOs that are doing it, because there's a theory that Gaia is actually doing it, where it does this huge thing. They want you to bring a camera. They want you to explore it. That's what they want. They want everybody to be talking about this thing, because it's like the idea that is in Hollywood, as long as they spell your name right, you know,
Yeah.
will rise. And that's what they're doing. And so they do this really weird stuff, like leaving at a million miles an hour. Like, why would you need to leave that fast? Or the most famous case where I was in Canada was this guy. The thing landed on a rock. He put his hand on it, moved around with this grid, which doesn't make any sense. It had this sort of grid on the side of the ship, and this hot air was coming out and burnt him and his clothes. He had this checkerboard thing on his chest that would disappear and come back and disappear and come back and stuff like that. And just this really weird. Then the question was like, why? What are they doing? Why did he land on a rock? They didn't do anything. They didn't talk to him. They didn't, and they just burnt him and they flew off again. And that's the thing. When you look at all these crafts, it's not really making any sense in terms of what they're doing. To me, that's why you got to go to the experiencer. That you can look at all the crafts you want flying around the sky, and you're never going to learn anything. How many fast ones, green ones, slow ones? What are they doing? They're doing all sorts of different things. You got to talk to people who've been on board the craft and who've engaged with the phenomena. Then you got a chance. You may not still figure it out, but at least you got a chance that these people actually interacted with the intelligence. The other stuff is just a waste of time. We've done it for 80 years. It's time to give up counting red ones and green ones and fast ones and slow ones. And who cares? Because they do all sorts of weird things in the sky. And it's so, that to
What
me
was
is,
that? Can you tell me about your experience? You were talking about Mount Shasta, and you said that you went up there. And I had heard you tell. I heard you talk about this before, but why did you originally go there?
I had a Latino girl who was helping me edit books and stuff. She works as a legal assistant. I think she's now in Denver, but she moves around the country. And she was there, and she said, "We're all going to Mount Shasta, the Latino Mission Rama group. There's 25,000 around the world. They're all mostly Latino people." And so she said, "Why don't you come to the mountain? We're going to meditate for world peace." And it's like, I had nothing against world peace. I got nothing against meditating, but I don't think I want to drive 3 hours, 3 days to California to sit on a mountain and meditate for world peace. So I was never really went along. And then I realized she'd help me. So I said, "Okay, Katerina, I'll come and we'll meditate for world peace." So we start this trip across the country with another girl who's helping me. She's an editor of my books. And we're going across the desert. And then suddenly there's a phone call through Katerina, through Paula Harris, and it came from this being, and the being said, Antarel was the name of the being, and it said, the message came through the phone was, "We know Grant's coming to the mountain, and there's be a program sighting on Saturday night." And program sighting is where they tell you exactly where the sighting is going to be and exactly what time. And it did appear exactly when they said it. There was two people. There has to be two people inside this group who pick up the message, and it has to be the same message. And then it's a real message. And it was this 9:33. It was 9:30 at night when this thing appeared over my head. So we were going there, and then I knew that these people had opened these, what they call zendras or portals. And I'd already at that point sort of determined that if they're moving from planet to planet or wherever they're coming from, they're popping in, they're popping out. They're doing this portal thing. That's how they're getting here. Because there's these two reports, very clear reports. And I interviewed a lot of the people who were in the Zendra, this portal thing, about so the group tries to raise its vibration. They they meditate for days, and then the UFO comes, but you never see the UFO land. It's just sort of like the guy's in the trees. He's at the edge of the trees. They take all these people, and I asked them. I'm talking to them about being in the portal. What do you see? Oh, there's this 10-foot guy. He was, and they two 8-foot people beside him, and he had sparks. He had this thing on his chest, and the sparks are coming out of his chest and stuff. And I go, "Oh, this is pretty cool." And I'm interviewing, and the same people in 2014 were there in 2015, except for the one guy. He was a Navy guy, and that was the guy who said he wasn't a hologram in 2015. So that's why I said, "Oh, I'll go there." And then when I heard there was going to be a program sighting, I thought, "Oh my goodness, they're going to open a Zendra. I'm going to go in the Zendra." And I'm not really interested in UFO sightings because, who cares? I've seen one pretty close. And so I thought, oh, I asked my assistant, "Do you want to go in the portal? Do you want to go? You want to go in?" I'm not really that interested. And then I figured, well, they've sort of picked me out because they for whatever reason, and I think the reason was that I wrote the first two books on Mission Rama in English. So all the writing, all this was in Spanish. So I wrote the English book. So there was two different groups that went there. I went with the first group, and then they were fighting the two groups. So then I went with the second group, and different things happened the second year that I went with the other group. So then I wrote it all up and concluded that these people are able to open these Zendras and portals every once in a while. They may open maybe one a year, one every couple of years or whatever. And it's all this idea where the being, you can't really confirm it. All these witnesses run around and tell the story, and then I get a hold of it, and then I go there, and then the CIA wanted to send somebody with me to look at the portal. They because that I believe was the technology. There's a video, I don't know if you've seen it, with Ron Pandolfi, who's the guy who runs the weird desk at the CIA, science and technology guy. He claimed to me he'd known President Trump for over 10 years, and the rumor was he briefed Trump on different things. And he was caught on camera, and I grabbed the video, and it's the only time he's ever been caught on camera talking about UFOs or even audio. But no, audio, there's one of them talking about UFOs, but this is video. And he said, people have always wondered what it's like to go in the next world. He's talking to his wife. People have always wondered what it's like to go in the next world. And he said, the next time John Sullivan goes to a desert, uh, first he said, there's been a breakthrough. The next time John goes to the desert, a number of us here will go into the next world and come back again. And I'd always heard through his wife, through people around Ron Pandolfi, that there was this deal, that there was this portal in the United States, somewhere in the desert, like Nevada or somewhere, where people could go in, and the other side opens the portal, you go in, and then you come back out of the portal. And they've been talking about it for years and years and years. And I sort of even at one point gave up, and I said to one of Ron's friends, I said, I've had it with this. This is chasing this stupid portal thing. That's the only reason I stayed here. This guy's insane. I don't want to deal with this. And then I said, do you think I should go? And he said, no, I should probably hang around. So I said, okay. And then a couple of years later, he says to me, he said, Grant, remember that question I asked you that time, and that you asked me the other a couple of years ago? I said, yeah, I know what the question is. And he said, it's real. I said, it's real? He said, yeah, it's real. I can tell you it's real. And he didn't get into any details, but that's the whole thing. Is now we've moved to this idea that you can pop in, you can pop out. This non-local thing, spooky action at a distance, where everything's entangled, and it's just a matter of changing part of the formula and the equation, and suddenly you're in a different position and stuff like that. Or the other thing is, in my book, and I'm doing a second follow-up book on it, on the flying the craft. People will say there's two of them for sure. Ron Johnson, they asked him, where would you like to go, Ron? I'll take you for a ride. He said, okay, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And here's what they said to him: Ron, it is within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there. So he imagined this, and he said, boom, there's 1 second of intense G-force, window opens, and there's the Milky Way off in the distance. And another woman told me exactly the same story. It is within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, push the button. And she would push this button. And she said, we were going right across the galaxy. She said, instantaneously. And that's what you see in out-of-body experience and lucid dreaming, is that you can instantaneously move from one spot to another. You see something and you're interested, and you zoom right in on it. And that's what we're seeing, is there's these parallels between mostly lucid dreaming and stuff like that, and this phenomena, this ability to plastic, everything's morphed, everything can change, everything, there's no speed, there's no time, all this kind of stuff. And then you start to realize, like, what are we really dealing with? Are we dealing with aliens? Are we dealing with some higher level mystical phenomena that is able to come into our world, manifest, and then go back where it came from?
Yeah, it seems like over the centuries, since the split off sort of like science, and when science became differentiated from mysticism and magic, in the 1600s or whatever, it seems like ever since then, like that, there's this thread of, like, maybe if we can get a microscope and look at the smallest thing, if we can get a telescope and look at the biggest thing, then we can categorize everything, and we can make a really neat little definition of what reality is,
Yeah.
But but once you go to the smallest thing, you realize there's not even a thing there, like you were
Yeah.
talking about with field theory and unified field theory, where there's just one field, where it's just
Yeah.
like there's really nothing. and then
Yeah.
and then there's everything's just popping in and out of nothing.
Yeah.
So therefore, is the UFO phenomenon, aliens from another planet,
Yeah.
or is it just the tip of the iceberg of something that we've kind of like pushed away for hundreds of years now that we've really not really addressed, and the only thing we address is, particles and things like that, that are, okay, that's a way to look at something, but
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
same time, that's not really real either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So does that make any sense?
It's always this fear of being ridiculed in the UFO, in the academic world, that they're never going to be able to get grants if you start talking weird stuff like this, because that's what they
Mm.
did with the Soul Conference. They know that consciousness is a factor in this whole thing, but they want academics to give them validation at this conference, so it's not allowed in the conference. And they say,
Yeah,
once we prove the UFO thing, then we'll bring up the consciousness thing. And it's like,
well,
no, you can't. You're not. That the consciousness is the bottom of the whole thing.
what bothers me is that UFO people
Yeah.
oftentimes do the same thing, like where, like for instance, I don't like to call other people out or anything, but I remember seeing James Fox, that director, the
Yeah. Yeah.
documentary director, and I remember seeing him on Joe Rogan, and he was with that the Sands was his last name. I'm talking about Jason Sands.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He had him with him on Joe Rogan, and they were talking, and Jason Sands was telling about some experience that he had, and the experience was going he worked in some military facility out west, and he was going through the desert, and then they saw this blue alien running down the side of the road or whatever, and he started to tell that, and James Fox stopped him and said, "If you tell that, I will get up and leave." And I thought he was kidding. I thought he was kidding. I was like,
Yeah.
but he was like, "No, I will get up and leave. This is that the only purpose that could serve is make us look ridiculous or something." And I was like,
Yeah.
you can't, you can't. He's doing the same thing that the government's doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're
Exactly.
when you're trying to you're trying to frame a narrative. You're excluding like massive amounts of evidence, and then you're just trying to frame a narrative. If he had an experience that's super weird and even laughable, it's still his experience. I still rather hear that than I'd rather hear some sort of like where you ignore everything, cherry pick facts, until you get to what you want it to be.
Yeah.
If you want it to be aliens from another planet, so
Yeah.
you're going to ignore everything that says it's not aliens from another planet.
Yeah. And everybody's in their own little world of, like, because I ran a bunch of buildings at the University of Manitoba, and I know that the chemists hang out with the chemists, and the biologists hang out with the biologists, and that because you're a biologist doesn't mean you know anything about UFOs. I mean, that we're in a different field. That these guys are very limited in what they know. It's even biology; they're in one little aspect of biology. That's their expertise. So you
Mm.
have this situation where we're being ridiculed, and Fox will not put an experiencer in his documentary. He said, "I can't go there," and that's his whole idea. Same as when Free was trying to get money for a consciousness documentary, they went to Ions, and Ions said, "We can't be involved with we can't if we be involved with UFOs, we'll lose all our funding." Like all the people who are funding psychic phenomena will say, "We don't. These people are crazy," and there's always this fight between the parapsychologists and the UFO people, and it's the view of
Yeah.
how the world
Who's
works.
crazier?
It's all this fighting for research money, and that's what it comes down to: money, money, money. It's always the bottom line
Mm.
in terms of, and so you'll get scientists who are covering it up because they're waiting for the patent. They know that Tim Taylor sold the one company for 88 or $100 million on Nasdaq. That involved part of it was this invention that he got that was given to him by this hooded figure, and so that's the thing is there's a lot of money involved, and that's why I think that if you look at Bob Bigelow has not been around on UFOs for 15 years now. He left after 2010. He's done some interviews, but what happened? But what happened in the past? And to me, I think he's working on consciousness and his spacecraft things, and he realizes that they're not getting anywhere. And that's a question people have to answer: is if we actually had the technology, why is Bob Bigelow not in the middle of this thing trying to back engineer his technology and talk about it? That you understand he's working on it, or why is Donald Trump not involved? Donald Trump is into money. So if there's a lot of money involved, and that's the thing, because these guys aren't involved, would tend to indicate that they look at it like Bob Bigelow, that they're 20 years away from figuring this thing out. And I'm not going to put money in for 20 years. He's interested in making money today. That's how corporations work. With the bottom line is the next quarterly report and stuff like that. And that may be why a lot of this is backlogged. Is the only people that can really develop it, have the funding, is the military, where you can do the funding. In private industry, if you got a craft and it's costing you $10 million a year to store the craft for security and stuff like that, then if you're not getting anywhere, and some other company comes and says, "Let me help you," they'll say, "Sure." But the government apparently blocked Bigelow from getting it. I think once Bigelow didn't get the craft, he just walked away. And he actually says, "I think they're seeding them. I think that Russia's got one, China's got one, South America's got one. We've got at least one, and I think the UFOs are seeding them." And that's the theory I have, or Tim Taylor has, this idea that it's gifting. They're gifting this stuff. They're actually giving us stuff, but it doesn't really have the answer. It sort of just leads you in this direction where you suddenly realize this consciousness interface thing, where that you can't move the craft, you can't open the door, you can't do anything until you do.
Yeah, I think that's how Jacques Vallée put it, where he said it would be like as if you went back in time 1,000 years and just dropped a cell phone on the table, and walked away. And it's like there's no way you're figuring that out, if you're from that time, But it's something to show you that, maybe it's for people that need to see that the mystery is there,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But like I was thinking about like the 2017 thing you were talking about, when everything since then there's been so much out there, more than I've ever seen in the UFO thing, like as far as I remember growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, and there was a lot of stuff with the, In Search Of, and there was a lot of stuff about pyramid power and Bigfoot and people bending, Uri Geller bending spoons and things like that. In addition to the UFOs, but I think now there is so much more information. This might be the renaissance of UFO thinking, at least. And I think for people who have been into it a long time, I see that people who are newer to the subject have this excitement about, we're going to get disclosure and all that, But I think there's something to do. There's something about the maybe you might call it jadedness, of people who have been into it for a long time. But I just don't think that it's like, what do you think's coming down the pipe here in the next year or so?
Well, as I said, like the way I see it is these high-level officials don't talk about like Tom DeLonge. He was told to call them the others, not extraterrestrials and stuff. So that may be as far as it's going to go. Is this briefer Ron Pandolfi? I've got a statement that he made after Trump made this announcement he was going to disclose, and he said the reason he's disclosing is to redirect things away from the failed Iranian thing, and what was the other thing? Oh, the Epstein files. And he said once nothing is revealed, once nothing is released, everything will calm down. And people got to realize this was already done in 2023. Was this attachment to the defense bill that said they had to send all the material to the archives, all the documents that they have from contractors and stuff. So he's just repeating something that was already in law, that Congress had requested this stuff. And everybody, I think, will have to admit they're not going to release classified material. They're, as far as they're going to go, is to say UFOs exist, and that the same as the aliens want it this way as well. If the aliens wanted to, whoever they are, if they wanted to reveal themselves or announce, they'd land on the White House lawn. They're not. They're playing the same game. They're playing this little, catch me if you can, these little mystery things. And that's, I think, where we're going to end up is that there's going to be admission that, yeah, it's real. And maybe that we've got bodies and crafts, but that's as far as it'll go. But there's so much pressure from the public now. And if you take a look, Jim Semivan, in his interviews, he talks about the fact that his human rights were violated by the beings coming in the bedroom. He's very upset. He's still upset 30 years later. And to me, it's like that's the best thing ever happened in the world, that these aliens came in there and rang his bell. Because what happened was he's the guy that went to the 3 other agencies and said, "You guys can't get this out. We're gonna drop this thing." We're going to do it. We're not going to release classified material, but we're going to drop this story. You guys had a chance to get this UFO story out. And that's where the New York Times article came from. Jim Semivan, he was behind this whole thing. He was the operational, I think, the operational guy. They were telling me at the time, he was called the big man at the time. And I knew this was all going to happen. Hillary Clinton was going to do the disclosure. And then Hillary Clinton lost the election. But they had Hillary Clinton set up to do the disclosure thing. And then they had to redo the thing when they lost the election. But that's part of the game, is that you have these people in the background who are pushing, and Jim Semivan's upset. And I said, like if it hadn't been for these beings coming into his room, we would not have disclosure today, because Jim Semivan would not have dropped all this stuff. Lou Elizondo wouldn't have come forward. None of that stuff would have happened. And so that's what the aliens are doing, is they're making people into these situations where you're trying to figure it out. And if you're you and me, we don't have that much power. But if you do it to a president or a head of covert ops, that guy's got some power to shift stuff around. And that's what they're doing, is they're just slowly, but they're not giving the answer, but they're just motivating people by giving them an experience that they can't get out. Because once you're an experiencer, you can't walk away from it. I mean, you just got to try to figure out what the hell's going on here and what happened to you. And I think that's all they're doing, is they're just motivating people to run around and talk. And the more people talk, right? Sometimes they call it the Jesus circus. So Jesus hadn't walked on water, fed 5,000 people, raised Lazarus from the dead. You never had heard of the guy. You do all this weird stuff, and then everybody pays attention, and then you deliver the message. And of course, the experiencers always say the message is the environmental thing, the nuclear weapons, and the fact that you aren't your body, and some mystical teachings and stuff like that. But that's all pretty common. But we got to get to that point where it's an academic exercise. I can tell you one experiment, and it's now the 8th. By the 20th, we'll have results back of a DNA test that I did on a person. It's a man who transitioned into a woman, and they claim that they have two souls in the same body. So what we did is the man leaves the body, the soul leaves the body on Friday night. On Sunday, we do a DNA test, and then he comes back in the body, and then the week after, then she leaves the body, and Friday night, Sunday, we do the DNA test. And the first test is going to come back before the 20th. And the way it was run by J.C. Knight back in 2015. And nobody duplicated the experiment. And I said, I'm going to duplicate the experiment. That's how science works. You're supposed to duplicate someone's experiment and see if it worked, it didn't work, or whatever. So if the DNA comes back female, it's game over, because then we basically prove that this is a man and a woman, because the second DNA is going to come back as a male. And that's what happened to Jay-Z Knight. She did, when she's channeling, she did it when
she's Ramtha.
Yeah,
is that what you're talking about? Yeah, okay.
So when Ramtha comes in, she does the DNA, and it showed male, Icelandic, North American Indian. When her DNA came back, when she was normal before she channeled, it was female French. And the same thing is going to happen here. We're going to have a documented example, the fact that the soul may exist. And so people say, well, I don't believe it. Well, you can do the same damn test you want, except I don't want to put these people through this test 100 times. Everybody is critical or whatever. But it's a DNA test. And the other thing is, the claim is that she's his daughter, that when he was in 2008, his fiance was pregnant. They lost the child, and that the soul of that child is this girl that came back in the body. So she's got into the body in 2008. So now she's 17 years old now. And so if the DNA comes back, the first DNA comes back female, it's over, because he's a man. He transitioned to a woman, but his DNA will be man. And if it comes back as female, and if it comes back as the mother, if that mother's done a DNA test, or the relatives, then how do you explain that this person who's not even related to the test, her DNA, this female DNA is coming back, so it'll be her mother's DNA? And so I asked, well, can we get the female, the mother, the girl that was pregnant, to do the test? And they said, no, she's not going to do no test. But that's the thing. You get these kind of tests that we can now run, and it challenges the people. Won't believe it, but it still challenges the fact that it's a different world than the way you think it is. And we're getting more and more all the time, because people say we're not making any progress, but we are. because I know in 1975 nobody knew what Area 51 was, nobody knew what near-death experiences was, nobody knew
Roswell. Yeah.
Roswell or Skinwalker Ranch. And you can go anywhere in the world now and you can say those terms and everybody goes, yeah, I know what you're talking about. They may not
Hmm.
believe it, but what you've done is you've raised the consciousness of the world to the fact, and that's what Max Planck, the guy that invented quantum mechanics, said. And he was being ridiculed on his discoveries as well. And he said, you do not win by convincing your opponent that you're right. You win when your opponent dies. And one funeral at a time, the next generation is not offended with the idea. So all the young kids today are not offended with the fact that there may be ETs, aliens, all this kind of stuff. They know it's the old generation. So when the old generation
Hmm.
goes away, and it moves slow, but that's the way it's supposed to work. We've got like an eternity to figure this thing out. But because we're, like Westerners, we have this idea we want everything and we want it yesterday. Like, I want a new cell phone, I want this, I want that, and we're in this grab thing where this materialistic thing where you can get stuff very fast, and they don't care. They want this lesson out there, and they've been sort of dropping this lesson since 1947. And people don't realize that the beings have changed. Before 1961, there was no grays, there was no reptilians, and there was no mantids. There's all sorts of catalogs of the sightings. They had guys in bubble helmets, which came right out of science fiction cartoons from the
Hmm.
1940s, 1950s. They had guys in suits in the 1950s and stuff like that. The beings were completely different. There was no grays reptilians. And so people have to realize, as I do after being in so many years, that the phenomena is morphing. It's 1896. It's wooden ships with propellers and balloons. And then it's Foo Fighters. And then it's Green Fireballs.
Hmm.
Then it's the Adamski crafts. Then it's Betty and Barney Hill type crafts. Then it's the triangles. I saw the first triangle in '76. The triangles come in, and then the grays come in, and the reptilians come in 1980. And people don't realize this phenomenon is like we think what's happening today happened then. I can absolutely guarantee you, there's nothing is farther from the truth than that. That this phenomena is morphing, is changing, and then you get the tic tacs. Well, there's no tic tacs back in those days. We're getting this stuff, and you get. I think the phenomena is just it's just doing something different, and watch them do this like when they're in the uh, the Nimitz case. So they go from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second. And so the
Hmm.
question is, what the hell's that all about? What are they doing? And it's like they just want you to say, "Holy shit, what the hell is that?" And they do the same thing. I say even they joke like they're flying. They waited for a couple of days. They're sitting there for a couple of days before the Navy guys actually went after them, on the carrier. And they're sitting there and they say, "Oh, here they come." And they just go, "Hey, Zogar, go make some bubbles in the water." And he goes, "Blah, blah, blah," and they go, "Oh, look at the bubbles in the water." And then this thing, and it goes to the cap point. It instantly goes from the cap point to where they are to the cap point. And they're going, "How do they know where the cap point was? How did it go so fast down?" And they did the same thing with ours in 1975. The reason we went out, we were going to go in February, but we didn't go. And in May, they got a film. And what the film was, this thing was on the ground, and they caught a TV crew caught this thing jumping into the air, went from the ground to 5,000 feet in the air in like 3 frames, and it lit up the entire one frame lit up the entire horizon. You can see the entire horizon for one frame, 1/24th of a second. And
Wow.
so you look at that and you go like, wow, like this is wild, and that drags me in. And then other people get involved and stuff like that, and that's what they do. They drag people in, and they're trying to figure this out. They don't need to jump 5,000 feet in 1 second. They were just saying because the guy he'd never shot a camera before. He was a film editor, and he's got the camera, and he said next time it glows up, I'm going to shoot so we get something on film, just so we have something. And then it's almost like the UFO said, "Are you ready? Get ready, get ready, get ready to shoot." And it's basically up in the air, and that dragged me out there, and that's why I'm thinking years later. I go, I wonder if they did that because I wasn't going to go. I had no interest in UFOs. If they had not done that, I never would have gone out because I just didn't have any interest. I didn't just interest in Edgar Casey and stuff like that. But UFOs, I never thought about UFOs. And so I got out there, and that's what they do. The one with Bud Hopkins, he got involved the same year as me. And his sighting was he goes to the guy at the local uh, corner store where he buys his liquor, and the guy says, "Oh, I saw this UFO." And it's the one in Close Encounters where it comes in behind the car, and the guy's going, "Come on, move around, move around." The bright lights are on, and it goes up and over top of the car, and then it goes, and that's an actual true story. So this guy was selling liquor, he's going home, and it went and it landed in this park. And he said these 10 guys, like robots, came out, and they all had a shovel and a bag, and they got a scoop of dirt, and they go back up into the craft. And Bud listens to the story. He goes, "Are you kidding me? What park is that?" And he goes and he checks, and of course, there's 10 holes in this park. And then, of course, Bud's going, holy cow. And suddenly he gets dragged into the phenomenon. And he's trying to figure this thing out. It's this big mystery and stuff. And same as Linda Howe, she got involved in 1975 as well. And she had no interest in UFOs. She's working on, science type stuff. And her brother is a helicopter pilot at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And he calls her and he says, Linda, there's UFOs over the weapons storage area where the nukes are at Malmstrom Air Force Base. She said, really? So she flies there, and that's when she discovers around Malmstrom they have all the Catlin relations. And she gets involved in the Catlin relations. She gets dragged in, and then Travis Walton gets abducted the same year, 1975. And then when Travis Walton's gone, I always tell people, you got to realize that he was gone for 5 nights. Every night he was gone, there was a UFO either over a nuclear missile silo or over a nuclear storage area in the United States. All 5 nights there was UFOs over, and so he gets involved. The first near-death experience book was written the same time Travis was taken, the beginning of November 1975. And you see all these things, you go, is this accidental? And it's like they're just sucking all these people in. And then the whole thing with the 2017, where they go to Jim Semivan and they, sort of rattle his cage, and he's sitting trying to figure out, what is this? Why were they in my room? And he goes to Ron Pandolfi, and Ron says, you don't have a need to know. You need some clearances. And then he gets this 6-7 hour briefing, and he's so scared after the 7-hour briefing, he said, I don't want another briefing. I've seen enough. And that's when he starts making these statements, like there doesn't appear to be any there. There's no dots and stuff like that. And then he talks about, it comes to I think it's this thing about reality, because he talks about the United States, 54% of people are reading at a grade 6 level. And he said, and then you're going to take this shit and drop it on them. And I think what he's meaning is saying there's no physical world, there's no colors, it's all space and fields and stuff like that. And everybody's going, what are you talking about? You and I can talk about it because we're sort of accustomed to it, but people on the street think you totally lost your mind if you start talking like that.
Yeah, I don't expect them to go. I don't expect them to go straight to that, but I do look forward to, and hopefully, like that we'll get away from just yet another story about like a so-called whistleblower who says that somebody told me this about, what I mean, and kind of incorporate. I'd rather incorporate experiencers more, and see if we and maybe see the conversation change more, and to include that with some respect, as opposed to being like acting like it's insane. That's insane. But what's not insane is nuts and bolts crafts coming from another planet.
Yeah.
When you're talking about those types of things, it's like everything that everybody's saying is all kind of incredible. So there's nothing more incredible about beings that are here around, and just in the same way that we are, they're part of the same thing that we are. There's nothing more incredible about that than there is about they came from Zeta Reticula or something like that.
Yeah. So this is a situation we're sort of stuck in, where it's up to you and I to sort of solve it for ourselves. And if you're an experiencer, that you can't leave it alone. You want to try to figure it out. And I think we're making progress. But everything works on money, on clicks. So you're talking about going back to the experiencer, but I've done both. So, I mean, I was told I was go crazy when I first, 2012, wanted to make the shift from nuts and bolts to this consciousness thing, because I had the download experience. And, but I know, because my YouTube channel, we're actually going to repost them, because this McCaslin guy has died. When this all was going on with Tom DeLonge, I knew what was going on. So I did these PowerPoints, and I got like 154,000 hits on these things with Tom DeLonge, and how the government, how that all these these generals and head of Lockheed Skunk Works and stuff, all that stuff, huge. And when I do consciousness stuff, I get like 2,000 hits, 3,000 hits or whatever. And you realize that consciousness just doesn't sell. You can go to Consciousness Life Expo, and we always make this joke. We go to and it's Consciousness Conference, Consciousness Life Expo in Los Angeles. And you can go, I lecture maybe 35 people, 30 people. And then across the hall, they have this room that holds 600 people. And they had the guy with the blue avians when that story was breaking. And I remember they gave me a ticket. It was like $75 or something. And then they said, you can go. And then I go, I'm not really interested in that thing. I just knew it was controversial. And then I thought, oh, well, it's a $75 ticket. I should, not, go and see what's going on, because somebody put this money out. So I went there, and there was like 100 people in the hallway, all mad as could be because they'd sold 700 tickets, and 100 people couldn't get in, and they had these tickets, and they're saying, what are you going to do? We need our money back, and there's a big fight going on, and that was the whole deal. Was he was talking about blue avians and and these 20 and back and all this kind of stuff, this weird stuff, and he had 700 people, and I had 35, and that always happens with consciousness stuff where people just they sort of just turn off. They may agree that that's probably the part of the problem, but that's what Walker said to us. Is Eric Walker? He said, "Admit it. You're just curious. Admit it. Why should we change the rules and the regulations to satisfy your curiosity?" And the bottom line is 99.9% of people in the world and in the UFO community just want a story. They're just interested in the story. That's why I say, what are you going to do? That's what Walker said. What are you going to do when the dog catches the car? What are you going to do when you figure this thing out? And the people, it's like, I'm going to go back to work tomorrow. It's just a story. It's going to be interesting story. And tomorrow I'll go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it's this thing about weapons, that they actually have a reason why they want this material. But for the vast majority of people, they just want to hear a good story. They're not really going to do any research. They're not going to try to back engineer it or anything like that. They just want to know. And you get the situation where the people with the money, the military, realize that we're in control of this thing. We're going to get the technology, and then like GPS, they'll give you the version 1 when they've got version 2 of GPS, accuracy and stuff like that. And that's basically the problem we have is this money thing that you can't get it going. You can't if you're talking consciousness, people will agree that get soul, but they just will not go there because like Fox. I can't go there. I can't put in UFO experiencer stuff. So all he's got is a bunch of stories about crashes and aliens running around, Brazil, Virginia, and stuff like that. And that's the stuff that sells. That's the stuff makes money. And the other stuff, it just doesn't. It's good. Like when you're doing lucid dreaming, when you get the calls, when you get the sign, and you realize, oh, there's something more to this, and you go down that route. It's very hard unless a person has the experience to tell them how important this experience of lucid dreaming or dreaming is to understanding how reality works. People just don't care. They just want to hear a story.
Yeah, well, it's also harder to put all that stuff into words, that words that make sense to people. And then, but when you're talking about Varginha crash or whatever, things like that, we've come no further than the 1950s, when it comes to that stuff.
And we knew in 1950 because the Canadian memo, the top secret memo, said we were told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. That was November 1950. So they knew about mental phenomena. And the guy that was addressed in the memo, Wilbur Smith was writing it, and he talked about Dr. Oman Salant, who ran weapons in Canada, the Defense Research Board. He's mentioned in the memo that we're going to get the material through Salant. 6 months after that memo was written, Salant was in a meeting at McGill University in Montreal. It was the first MK Ultra meeting with the CIA and the Brits, and they started this MK Ultra in Canada, and ended up paying $1 million lawsuit to all the people that were involved, and that's the whole thing. So in 1950, they already knew that mental phenomena was involved in this, and they've been working on it since 1950. And the idea that it's nuts and bolts may be right, but it's also they knew mental. How did they know there was mental phenomena in 1950? And I say the reason they may have known was because the Roswell crash had 3 dead aliens and 1 live alien, and the rumored story was that the live alien was talking in people's heads. So if you're a military intelligence guy, you go, "Oh my goodness, if I could learn to do that, how does this work?" And that's why they clamped down on it so high. Is it had this really weird aspect that if we can back engineer, or even I wrote a book on ports. And I actually quote a defense intelligence. I showed the document in the book, defense intelligence document from 1950. And ports is where you can make stuff appear and disappear in a room and stuff like that. And they said if we can perfect this technology of ports, we can go to the Russians. We can go inside the vault. We can get the documents. We can bring them back to Washington. We can photocopy the documents, and we can bring them back and put them in the vault, and they'll never even know we were there. And that's the way they're looking at this as all technology.
Yeah. Man, it's all for some sort of like nefarious thing that they're always wanting to use stuff like that for,
And I get into fights now with people who are high level people in the United States. One guy told me they were talk about there was going to be a meeting with Trump, and I said I put it on my website, and they said you're to take this down immediately. This is national security. And I said, Well, you realize this is Jack Safradi. I said you realize, Jack, that I'm in Canada and the United States has threatened to invade Canada. Well, my idea of national security is a little bit different than yours. I could give a shit about your idea about national security. I'm worried about my own. And this is the whole point: is why am I going to help the Americans to develop technology to drop on my grandson? I mean, there's no makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
So they have the idea of this national security, but for a Canadian, the Canadians just they want to do scientific research. They're not interested in weapons or going into wars and stuff like that. Whereas the American, the whole economy is basically more and more being driven by this national security and me versus you, which is one of the main messages in the mystical literature, is the idea of separation. All that's what I put it is all that's considered to be evil in the modern world is created by one thing and one thing only: the mistaken belief in separation. That
Hmm.
idea where I'm an individual and I'm sovereign. Don't tell me what to do. All this kind of stuff, and that's the attitude that is there. And so then you get situations where if you bring up Eastern mystical traditions, it's ignored because they couldn't build cell phones, 4,000 years ago. And that
Hmm.
we have this idea: if you can build a cell phone, then you're doing well. So most people are just content with the material world because it's producing all these new technologies and stuff like that. But then again, when somebody says you got 3 months to live, then the panic sets in, and people are trying to figure out why are we actually here. And the bottom line is, where did we come from? Where are we going? And did we agree to come here? Did we agree to do something? And are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? And that people just sort of totally ignore why we're here and just sort of assume it's accidental. And rape, pillage, kill, and steal. Whoever's got the most toys when they die wins. That's the mentality we've got now. And the UFO thing is saying oneness versus separation. If you work together as a team, you win. If you don't work together, you're all fighting against each other. It all falls apart. And it's a simple lesson, but it's being taught. In Eastern traditions, in all sorts of mystical traditions, where you get somebody who's able to go in the field, get the material, and bring it back. It's the same message all the way through history that people this oneness versus separation idea, and so
Hmm.
they just ignore it. But we at least realize that there's a possibility that we came in here for a reason. We're going to leave. They're going to ask you how to work out because you planned the whole thing. Nobody is planning your life. You so I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that and stuff. And it's this whole different world that we're spend our whole lives trying to figure out what's going on. And most people live lives of quiet desperation and never even think about it until there's 3 months to go.
Yeah, uh, I think that it's fortunate though that more and more people are getting on board with the idea of oneness as opposed to separation.
Yeah.
I think so. And then in my opinion, like the only things like voting and all these sorts of like things like that don't really have any effect. Or the only way you can have an effect on the world is how you interact with other people in
Yeah.
your world.
Yeah.
And if everybody gets, if everybody's doing that in a positive way, and everybody's, then then it has an effect that it will spread, and hopefully that's what we can look forward to in the future. But I'll tell you, I really appreciate you speaking to me today, Grant. And like I said, you're one of my favorite thinkers on this subject, and you've certainly given me a lot more to think about today. So